Welcome to College Recruiter. I'm Anna Peters, content manager, and College Recruiter believes that every student and recent grad deserves a great career. So I have teamed up today. I'm joined by Randy Pennington, who is the owner of Pennington Performance Group. Hi, Randy.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us. Randy is an expert in helping organizations build cultures that are focused on positive results in a changing world of uncertainty, as well as cultures focused on relationships and accountability. So I brought him here today because I want to dive into this concept of hiring for altitude. So in addition to aptitude and looking for attitude, Randy has some thoughts on what altitude means and how to hire for it. And especially I'm going to pick his brain about entry levels. So thanks again.
My pleasure.
Tell us, Randy, in your let's get into a definition of what this means. So employers certainly know by now that they need talent that is adaptive. So how would you differentiate between altitude and simple adaptability?
That's a great question, and it's one that we really thought about. And I mean, kind of go back and give you the backstory a little bit of how we came up with this concept of altitude, because I think that sets the stage for this about adaptability and how it's different. I was sitting in the office of one of my clients, the president of a publicly traded company, and he was telling me about two of his employees who had great attitudes, were wonderful team players, that were great at their job when they were hired, but now the company was growing and they couldn't keep up. Mm-hmm. They couldn't reach that altitude, if you will. And he said, I hire for aptitude and attitude. And I said, but the problem is they don't have the altitude. Now that's part of people who do what I do for a living. We think in alliteration. So
it's got to be catchy, right?
It's got to be catchy. It's got to be catchy. I just read a statistics that, the average person gives you 10 seconds on a video. So it's got to be catchy.
Don't I know it?
Yeah. And so, but the idea of altitude is these people were highly adaptable. They would do anything that you asked them to do. So adaptability really is that focus on, when you're presented with something, you're presented with a challenge, you're quickly adapt and move in that direction. It's part of being nimble. And that's crucial. It's important. But it's not the same as being anticipatory about it and thinking and having a high ceiling, if you will. And so the idea of altitude is, what does it take to have a high ceiling in today's workplace? Mm-hmm. And adaptability is certainly a piece of it, but so is competence, basic competence, and competence to do not just that job, but the next job. Right. So does commitment and attitude. But there are really some things that go beyond just being adaptable that lend to more proactive focus on, how do you look for what's next?
Yeah. Yeah. So as opposed to reactive, I can see how altitude really ties into the business need as opposed to just absorbing and adjusting to what you are given.
Right. And, everywhere I go today, leaders, and it doesn't matter, we're talking certainly at senior levels, but even at entry levels too, they want people who, and the term that I've used is they want people who are students of the business. In other words, they know what they need to understand how the business works and how they can help the business get better. Yeah. And so they're a student not only just of what they do, but of how the overall economics of the business work, how their customers work, how do what they do go help them extend their brand, if you will. Mm-hmm. And so that altitude gets into those, what are those competencies that you have to be able to make yourself more valuable to your employer.
So on that note, when you look at the talent pool that's out there, I mean, we talk about talent gaps and talent shortages and the gap between, especially in the tech world, but what employers really need and then what colleges are producing, or not even colleges, but at any level. Do you think there is enough talent that actually has altitude? And if not, can you grow it?
Well, the short answer is no, there's not.
Yeah, I kind of knew you were.
That's the easy answer. That's the easiest answer we'll have all day is no, it's not. But the reason why it's not, and can you make you grow it? You can extend it. I remember back in graduate school, my abnormal psychology professor asked this question, and you'll see where I'm going with this in a moment. She asked, if you could do anything to ensure that a child grows up to be schizophrenic, what would you do?
What's the answer?
And the answer is have a child born to and raised by two schizophrenic parents. Because part of it is genetic, obviously. Mm-hmm. Part of it is environment. And it's the age-old struggle between nature and nurture. Are we the way we are because of nature? Well, part of it's that way. Are we the way we are because of nurture? Yes. And so, while I can't make you more creative than what your nature intend. I mean, you can't go from being completely uncreative to being Picasso.
Sure.
There's some genetics that go into that, but we can make you more creative. We can help you learn the skills and the behaviors to be more collaborative. We can create an environment to help you be more courageous in how you do things. And those are things that we can, we can extend, but then even, are there upper limits of altitude? That probably gets back to the individual piece of it. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
It definitely makes sense. And it also makes me think, if this is such a rare skill or competency, then employers, when they find it, should really grab onto it. And anything else that might be missing from that candidate's skill set should be trained or adjusted.
Well, and you can. I mean, you can't. You have to assume that there's a certain amount of aptitude that goes into it. You have to be able to have the intellectual chops, if you will, to rise to that level. So, if they can't meet the basic requirement of the current job, chances are they don't have the altitude to move into that 3 or 4 levels up job.
So that begs the question. I mean, if they're going to embrace this concept of altitude and balance their hiring now between attitude and aptitude and now altitude, this triangle of elements, how do they balance that? What do they look for first? Does one necessarily come with the other?
Well, I mean, I think you have to look at, there's it's over the last several years, this notion of you hire attitude, you teach skills,
right, has
really taken hold. I'm a firm believer in that you have to hire attitude and people, but Southwest Airlines is known as a company who sort of pioneered that notion of hire attitude, teach skills. At the same time, you don't get to fly the airplane just because you can tell a funny joke. So yes, you have to have some basic competency. If I'm working in the tech world and you expect me to write code, there has to be some basic ability to write code. Now, you can teach me to write code, but there has to be some basic ability to do that. And you have to be able to have people who fit the culture, who play nice in the sandbox, who do those types of things. So I really think of as aptitude and attitude are the fundamentals. That's what gets you in the door.
Sure.
The altitude piece today, at least, and this could change. I mean, there was a time that attitude was considered an extra. Now attitude's considered a basic. Mm-hmm. And so I think in time, people will start looking for all three simultaneously, and they'll figure out, I'm a little short here, but I can make up for it over here. Mm-hmm. But right now, the whole concept of hiring for headroom or altitude and where can they take you, that's going to be something that people will look at and go, that's an extra, not a minimum requirement.
I want to ask you about entry level, because if you're right, that at least for now, employers are probably going to focus more on aptitude and attitude, get them in the door. What about the entry level roles and entry level new hires that might only stick around for 2 years? Does it even matter for those entry level hires?
I think it depends probably a little bit on the entry level position. And this is anecdotal, so I have to qualify that. But one of the things that I do is I'm an instructor in the Cox Business Leadership Center at Southern Methodist University. So I work with MBA students there, and I've done that for 20 years or so. I know I look much younger, but but here's what I've seen is that the MBA students now tell me, that they don't intend to stick around, but they do intend to be back. So here's a conversation I had just a few months back. I said, very bright student, tell me what your career goals are. Well, I'm in this job right now. I will be here until I finish my MBA. I'll probably stay a year after that. And then I'll go to, and he named another company, and then I'll be there for 2 years, and then I'll go to another company, and then they'll be there for 2 years. And the goal is in 5 years, I come back here, because this is really, I wanted to start my career here. I want to end my career here. But I want to come back in my boss's job.
I see. And they would like to grow their skills and develop themselves elsewhere.
And they also know that in that culture, in their environment, that bosses, that they can't get there if they only go up through the ranks in that organization. So my first response would be, if you have someone who's really bright at an entry level, and they have altitude, that's okay to develop it, because they might come back. Mm-hmm. And if they find themselves in a place where they want to come back, if they're a great employee and they have the ability to come back, then that might actually pay off for you, pay dividends for you. Now, I would say, if it's something that is a pure, this isn't an entry level job, it's a summer job.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's a little bit different beast then.
That's something that's completely different. But if I'm looking at entry level people and I know that I'm going to have talent needs in the future, all those baby boomers are sooner or later going to finally decide to retire.
Yep.
All those Gen Xers are finally going to decide that they're going to retire. And you want to have outstanding talent who sees you as a place where they want to be.
Mm-hmm. That's difficult for employers. I think it's a challenge to have such a long view, to develop talent for 10, 20 years from now that might come back to you.
Well, it is difficult to do, and especially if you're in a publicly traded company and you live by the quarterly numbers. Yep. It's incredibly difficult for you to do. But I think part of it is that your long-term, that's an indication of your altitude as well, as a recruiter, to be thinking that far down the road, or as a leader within the business to be thinking that far down the road. That's going to be that is a high level of strategic thinking about where the business is going. Mm-hmm. That makes you more valuable as a candidate for your own career. Sure. So I do think you're right. It's hard to do. In today's world, you do have to keep one foot in the present, and then you have to be.
But only one.
Yeah, you have to be moving out. You have to be. I used to say you'd have to be scanning horizon for what's next, but then someone said, "Well, if it's on the horizon, you can see it. You need to be going over the horizon."
You go around the corner. Yeah.
Right.
I want to ask you about the list of competencies. It was maybe 4 or 5 competencies that you listed as indicators in your LinkedIn article that you published on LinkedIn about altitude. List them off for me, first of all, because I don't have them right in front of me. But okay. When I read them, they struck me as all of them, or most of them, could be, you could argue that are gender neutral, or even leaning towards feminine qualities. So I wanted to tap into that and see what you thought. Can you speak to how focusing on altitude might actually be part of an organization's D&I strategy?
Sure. So first off, let's kind of get those out on the table. What I said in the article was there are 2 things that are givens, and it's that you're competent and that you're committed. That sort of gets to attitude and aptitude. the committed deals with attitude, because if you're committed, you're more likely to be a team player, do those things. And then if your competence deals with your intellectual ability, your innate, your skill set, whatever the technical skill set of what you do is. The 5 that go create altitude: curiosity, creativity, collaboration, coachability, and courage. Mm-hmm. Now, courage is the one that people go, well, what does that mean? I think organizations have a real struggle with finding people who will speak up.
True.
And so the courage, there's a courage piece as a leader. You're willing to accept views that aren't your own. And there's a courage piece as an employee that says, I am willing to tell the truth as I see it or as I know it. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be, somebody said, I want people who are brutally honest. No, you can be honest without being brutal.
Fair enough.
Right. I want you to be honest. I want you to tell me the truth. But that doesn't mean that you can be disrespectful about it or anything like that. Okay. So, if you look at curiosity, coachability, I mean, they are sort of gender neutral. And you could say that certainly the more social aspects of it are things that we traditionally, label as a feminine characteristic.
I think particularly collaboration and maybe
collaboration.
Even we find, and of course these are all generalizations, but we find in as feminine qualities.
Well, and we do, and so part of my response would be, haven't we learned that take no prisoners approach that is traditionally done with associated with males hasn't really worked over the long term. So to the extent that they are more feminine qualities, cool.
So you're gonna live with an accident.
Right. Yeah. But I mean, I don't know that I thought about them that way, but I mean, when you asked that question, my first response was, I could see that. And, I think, there's 2 pieces. One is from a recruitment standpoint. You want to be looking for that. And so you may need to think differently about who you hire. And that might open the door to more of that diversity and inclusiveness piece. And I think as a college, if you're an educator, if you're in the university setting, then you need to be thinking about what are you teaching people, what are you teaching your students to do and how they learn and how they explore? Because, very often if you look at the most innovative people in history, a lot of them were pretty lousy students.
Yeah. Well, they didn't accept status quo. They didn't accept the system as it was meant to teach them.
Right. And they were extremely curious. They were extremely creative. They were very motivated and what have you. And so I think one of from a university standpoint, one of our challenges in university is to, figure out, how do you get your curriculum done, which I understand that you have to do, but you still allow people the space to be creative and roam a little bit and explore. And how do we reinforce that? It requires a different sort of education model in some degrees too.
But to the one point about the gender thing is, it makes me think even more and confirm my own observation that I keep seeing leadership lean towards what we need in leadership. Let me put it this way. What employers are finding that they need in their leaders is no longer what worked 50 years ago. The kind of command and control, masculine leadership is no longer what I mean, maybe that worked, but that's not what businesses need anymore. And it's not working. The flatter hierarchy is, whether or not that will stick around, but what employers are finding or identifying in good leaders are these gender neutral qualities. So I think
absolutely. And I mean, we tend to. I am old enough that I remember working in a command and control environment on occasion, and I hated it then.
Yeah,
so it wasn't like Yeah, I want to qualify that, just because people use command and control, that doesn't mean employees really liked it.
Sure. It doesn't mean that it worked. It's just that was
That was the prevailing thought. And so what's happened is, if you look at even in the military, we tend to equate command and control in a military environment. But if you talk to people in the military, especially in combat functions, yes, there's a certain level of command and control, but the most autonomous group out there is the unit that's fighting on the ground. That
you can't loop back to the decision maker in the moment that a decision is required.
Right. And so I have a public sector organization that I was working with last fall, and one of the guys that I was talking to was the chief of police, and we were talking about command and control. Police departments are traditionally very command and control, and his comment was, and he's a younger leader, relatively new in the job, generation, he's probably in his upper 30s, late 40s. So for that type of job, he's really pretty young in that job. And he says, I need my officers to be able to understand how to deal and think through and deal in every situation in the moment.
Yeah. Said a million other CEOs.
Right. And so, so I mean, I do think this requires the biggest change this is going to require. The change in leadership may be bigger than the change in applicants. My view of what I see in the applicant pool today is there are really bright people out there that want to be creative, that are extremely curious. I tell my corporate clients all the time, when you hire a young professional today, coming out of university, I just want you to be aware that within the first 3 days, they've already figured out 5 things you can do to make your business better. Because they're used to questioning everything and to looking for, and if they grew up playing video games, they understand the concept of finding a shortcut. Because there's a shortcut in every level of a video game, and so they understand, how to find that hack, if you will, and so I think while there's some things we can do on the education side, I think there's some things we can do to prepare people on the recruitment side. I think the challenge for not necessarily recruitment professionals and HR professionals, but in line leadership, because very often those are people who arrived where they are in the organization, knowing how to play by rules that you're now changing.
Yeah. I want to ask you a little bit more about entry-level hiring, and we can wrap this up. But for recruiters out there who like this concept of hiring for Altitude, and they have that need of their organizations, how on earth? So you have the indicators that you listed off. But when it comes to going to colleges where the talent just doesn't have a lot to show on their resume, what are some proxies, or what are some
That's a great question.
Identify this?
That's a great question, Anna, because while they may not have a lot to show on their resume, they have other things that they've done in their life. So if you only look at the resume, you're only looking at one part of the person anyway. And, I think, I go back to Amazon has done an amazing thing with its Alexa development team, because they have people, you would think Alexa, that's artificial intelligence but there are people on there that give Alexa personality. They're not, there's a code to do that, but there's people, there are English majors and literature majors and philosophy majors and they're working on a highly technical team, because what they need from that is someone who's more than just a coder. Yeah. And so you have to look for where the talent is that can translate, and it may not be visible. But there's other things in their life. Have they shown creativity? Have they shown how they can work together to accomplish a big goal? Have they shown that they're coachable? by the way they've approached their competency set and their skill set. I mean, there are behavioral interviewing questions for this, just like there are behavioral interviewing questions for any other aspect of it. You just got to do the work to figure it out and what works for you.
On that point, thank you, Randy. This is great. This has been a fun conversation. I appreciate your insight.
My pleasure. It was fun.